Of the many themes that come up in Endo's novel Silence, one of the themes can be the process of losing a dream. And in the process of losing a dream, latching on, grabbing on to some other kind of mission. And I think we can see this thing in our world where people set out with great ambitions. They set out with great motivations. They want to do good, noble, helpful things. But the challenges are so immense. The difficulties are so continuous that sometimes they find themselves losing that dream, losing a sense of what it was in the first place that motivated them, losing the energy and the drive that it takes to continue. We can see this in the world of business. We can see this among pastors. We can see this among teachers. Teachers who start out with the greatest ambition, with the greatest enthusiasm. But the daily challenges of teaching, and the multitude of challenges that come along with teaching can wear a person down. And that sense of that noble dream we started with can get lost. And this happens, and we can see it. We see it in the novel. What we see in the novel illustrates in an extreme form what we can see in the world. And when this happens, when people feel like this great ambition they had, this great, good, noble ambition they had, when they feel like it's been lost, then the question is, well, so now what? What do we do with this experience? And there are a number of things that make Endo's novel Silence useful, just practically useful in our own lives. But this is one of the themes that I think that can be useful to us if we reflect on it. We notice at the very beginning or near the beginning of the book, that there's a strong sense of confidence, that the priest who's going to go to Japan has a high sense of confidence. He knows why he was born. I was born a priest to devote my life to the service of man. He has a high degree of confidence in his own ability to persevere. What a disgrace it would be to betray my vocation, that is my calling, from cowardly fear. So we have the language of confidence. I know what my mission is, and I'm confident that I'll persevere. Then we have a statement about motivation. The only luggage we have is our own hearts, that is, our desire to help the people of Japan. For the first time, the Japanese peasants have met men who treated them like human beings. So we want to go to Japan, says the priest from Portugal, yes, to bring the Catholic sacraments, Eucharist, baptism, confession, etc. But we also want the people of Japan, perhaps especially the peasants of Japan, to know that they are important, that they are valuable. Who could deny that this is an important, noble mission? And then there's also a sense of confidence about what God is up to, about what God will do. Everything God does is for the best. The conviction grows deeper and deeper in my heart that all will be well and that God will protect us. So there's this language of confidence. We have a lot of confidence. I know what my mission is. I know what my motivation is. I think I know what God is up to. A lot of confidence. But of course, as we work through the novel, it doesn't take very long for questions to arise as well. Why has God given our Christians in Japan such a burden? This is something I failed to understand. So the questions do arise, but initially they can be kind of pushed aside because our confidence is greater than the doubts that may arise from certain questions. But of course, as we move deeper and deeper into the story, it becomes harder and harder to push those doubts aside. And it becomes harder and harder to hold on to that sense of confidence. As the story continues night after night, the people of the Japanese village offered up their prayers. I do not believe that God has given us this trial to no purpose. And so here's this struggle. We see the Japanese peasants suffering tremendous persecution. But I refuse to believe that there's no great purpose working itself out here in Japan. And then this language of confidence again, everything our Lord does is for our good. So that confident assertion, things will work out. God has a plan. And of course, those statements may be absolutely true, but it seems that in the story, those statements take on a meaning that the Catholic priest who's at the center of the novel Silence, he could not have known what these statements actually could mean. Everything that our Lord does is for our good. Well, that may actually turn out to be right, but at the end of the novel, although it's not clear, and the priest, I think, certainly at this stage of the novel, would have a hard time seeing that where he ends up could be called in any way good. And as is related in the title of the novel, the persistent challenge is the silence of God. The silence of God. The seeming coldness of the universe. The tremendous suffering that the Japanese experience. The tremendous psychological, spiritual turmoil that comes to the priest as he realizes that the Japanese are suffering because of the message that he brought. He watches Japanese being not just persecuted, but tortured in horrific ways. And tortured, the methods of torture being used just go on and on and on. This is designed, some of these methods of torture are designed to go on for days before the Christian finally dies. And the priest looks out over that cold ocean as it washes over the bodies and the waves coming and going. And that seems to be a metaphor for the silence of God. Where is God in all of this? Where is God in all of this? And so the questions move to the center. Early on, the questions can sort of be batted away because confidence is the stronger thing. But confidence begins to fade, and the difficult questions move to the center. And then, so here's the question, what had happened to our glorious dream? And we can imagine a lot of people in a lot of walks of life asking themselves this sort of question when they set out on some great mission to do real good, just as the priest at the center of the novel Silence sets out to do real good. He wants those Japanese people to know that they are important, right? That they matter. Well, this is good and useful work. But the challenges are so overwhelming. What happened to our glorious dream? That business person who sets out really to contribute something genuinely worthwhile to the world, to the economy. But the challenges are so seemingly so overwhelming. What happens to that dream? The pastor who has good ambitions about what can be done in a community, but the challenges become so great and pile up so much that pastor might wonder, what happened to our dream? The teacher who has such a great outlook, such great motivations, going into the world of teaching, but not really understanding the real challenges that can come in the world of teaching. And after some time, that teacher might ask, what's become of the glorious dream? Of course, this doesn't happen to everybody. Perhaps it only happens to a small number of people, but it does happen. And it's worth reflecting on this because I suppose there's always the possibility that it could happen to us or to someone that we know. Here's the usefulness of, or one of the things that makes this novel, Silence, useful. It can give us this opportunity to reflect on this kind of difficult but real topic. The challenge of the silence of God, which then leads to the thought that, wow, I mean, maybe God doesn't even exist. Like, what am I doing here? I came here from Portugal. I put my life, knowing that I was putting my life at risk, although I couldn't, not being here in Japan, I couldn't really know what that meant, And maybe I could have thought of myself as a heroic priest, heading into this difficult situation. But now I get here, and I know what it sounds like when the Japanese Christian peasants are being tortured. I know what it sounds like. I know what it looks like. In this profound silence. And you begin to question the whole thing. I mean, maybe I was mistaken, completely. Maybe I'm just completely mistaken. Maybe this whole thing is just some crazy, useless situation that I've gotten myself into. It's a powerful and distressing thing that happens in the novel. And the central priest hears from another priest who had given up, who had lost his noble dream. He had given up. And that priest says, before your eyes stands the figure of an old missionary defeated by missionary work. I'll bet there are missionaries out there who will understand that sentence. Just change the kind of work. There are different people who do different kinds of work, who get into that work for the right reasons, have the great motivations, have a sense of confidence and perseverance, but after a while, the work itself defeated them. And if that happens, then what? Then what? And then, most surprising of all, maybe, for this Catholic priest, Christ himself tells the priest, in a sense, to give up. What the priest is told is that if he sets his foot on an image of Christ, indicating that he has renounced Christ, indicating that he has given up Christianity, if the priest will do that, then the suffering of other Christian peasants will stop. And this priest, now broken down by the tremendous difficulty he has faced, physical, spiritual, psychological difficulty that he's faced, he feels that Christ himself is speaking to him from the image, saying, trample on me, right? Now this is the last thing we would have expected Christ himself to say. That the right thing to do at this moment is to appear to deny me, right? That's what this missionary thinks he hears Christ say. And of course, the missionary never would have thought that Christ would say such a thing. The right thing to do right now is to appear to deny me. And in doing this, you will save the lives of some Japanese Christians. As the story goes, the silence of God abates, and the priest and Christ actually have a dialogue, a brief dialogue right at the end of the book. And the priest says to Christ, I feel bitter because you were silent. And Christ responds and says, I wasn't silent, I suffered beside you. I suffered beside you. And so there's this sense of fellowship, a sense of the fellowship of suffering. And maybe we get some insight into what this whole thing now actually means. I mean, is this a hopeless, depressing story that just ends with a big question mark? Or does it actually end up in a place that the central priest never could have imagined, but does it still end up in kind of a meaningful place where a big lesson is learned? And what happens is that although the priest appears to have renounced Christianity, although the priest appears to have betrayed Christ, in this condition of great humiliation, in this condition of defeat, he finds himself still being asked by at least one Japanese Christian named Kichijiro to hear his confession. At least this one Japanese Christian, who's not a very sympathetic figure in many ways, Kichijiro, but at least this one Japanese Christian comes to the priest and says, I need you to hear my confession. And the priest responds and says, I can't hear your confession anymore, I'm not a priest. But Kichijiro insists. And this at least becomes the priest's new mission now. To live not with a sense of high confidence, but to live in a state of humiliation, to live in a state of defeat, but yet still, as a priest, at least in the eyes of one Japanese Christian. There's nothing glorious about it. No trumpets are blasting. But there is still something useful about it. One person serving another person. And the priest finds that his relationship with Christ has deepened. Certainly it's become more complicated, and certainly it has changed a lot, but it has also deepened. And we have this quote right near the end of the novel. He, that is the priest, Father Rodrigues, loved him, that is Christ. He loved him now in a different way from before. Everything that had taken place until now had been necessary to bring him to this love. There were those statements of confidence at the beginning that everything that God does is for the best. It's really hard as you go through the novel to think, wow, how could this possibly be the best? And I think even at the end of the novel, that's a difficult idea to go along with, that everything that happened was somehow for the best. But it's not a hopeless story. There's still some meaning that comes from it. And for those of us who, those of us or those we know who set out to do great and good and worthwhile things. And the challenges are tremendous, and the challenges are immense, and the challenges perhaps over time wear us down and defeat us. The question then is, so what can we pull out of this? Where is the meaning in this? What can we learn from this? There's still something here to be learned. There's still something here to teach. There's still something here to offer. And the answer to that question, of course, will depend on who we are and what we have done and the opportunities that are before us. But it's not an easy theme to contemplate, but it's a theme that's worth contemplating because it does happen in our world. And I think it's one of the many things that makes this novel by Endo, Silence, that makes this novel worth not only reading, but reflecting on.